8 offensive players go off the board in the first 8 picks. 4 quarterbacks, 3 receivers, and Joe Alt. What do you think he does at 9?
I would think his first priority would be to see if he can find a trade back partner. But as you know, you need 2 to tango, right? So, you're talking about the best defensive player on the board. Presumably that's going to be Dallas Turner from Alabama. But is a team going to want to come up there and give significant capital? Because I'm sure Poles is going to be looking for a second or a third round pick this year, depending on how far back he goes. And you're talking about a team that's going to say, all right, we need Dallas Turner. We don't want Latu. We don't want Chop. We don't want Verse. We need Turner. And because I don't think there's a huge separation on those top defensive edges, it may be a situation where Poles has to think outside the box. Maybe he looks at the second offensive tackle. Maybe it's Fuaga or Latham or someone like that. But for me personally, this defense, the Eberflus scheme, you need that disruptive 3-tech. You need that game wrecker in there. And that's why I think the Bears will at least consider someone like Texas's Byron Murphy, who I think has a huge upside to potentially be one of those elite 3-techs in the league.
I don't think we've discussed him with any sense of detail in a Poles position yet. So this is good to get there. Yes, on the relevance and the need for a dominator there. Tell us if you think Byron Murphy can be that guy. What does the scouting report say about Byron Murphy?
Well, for me personally, I think he can be. I mean, when I look at a 3-tech, and look, I think Javon Dexter had a nice season. In fact, I think he played better than I expected him to. But to me, Javon Dexter is a contributor at the defensive line in those interior positions. I don't see him as a guy. He's going to be a good player, but I don't see him as a guy who is just going to take over a game and dominate. We can use Aaron Donald as the example, and of course, there's only one Aaron Donald, but that's the goal. And if it's not Aaron Donald, is it DeForest Buckner? Is it Jeffrey Simmons? Is it Christian Wilkins? You need that type of guy, I really think, to elevate this very good defense into that elite level. So when you talk about a guy like Sweat, what makes Sweat interesting? To me, it's his explosive and powerful play. I mean, this guy is an athlete at the position. And the people who don't like him, the first thing they're going to do is say he's too light. He's too light to be an interior defender. But I would rebut that and say, defensive tackles are getting lighter. If you look at the last 4 or 5 years, it's trending that direction. So a player with a little bit of a lighter frame like Murphy, I don't think is going to scare teams like it might have 4, 5, 6 years ago. He's agile. I think he plays with really good instincts. And he can win a multitude of ways. He can win with power. He can get around players. I think you can, move him around in the defensive front. You could bounce him out into even like a 5-tech position. I think he could win out there with his hands and his hips and his feet. Like if you watch the tape and see how he maneuvers around blockers, it's really impressive. That's what I like about him. Like if you watch a full body of tape with like Newton from Illinois versus Murphy from Texas, you might sit there and say, well, Newton's a better player because he has splashier plays. But when you watch Murphy and try and look, and I'm not saying I'm Daniel Jeremiah out here, but when you try and project these guys out, you have to love the ceiling on Murphy. I really think he could become a special player.
So compare him to Jalen Carter, to other prospects there, because I got to be honest, there would be some level of disappointment if it felt like they were settling for a defensive player, because if these guys were great defensive players and great defensive prospects, they'd be top 5 picks.
Well, to use the Jalen Carter as an example, and I was a big fan of Jalen Carter's abilities on the field, I think there's a part of the Carter evaluation that he was elevated because of the fact he was at Georgia and had a lot of really high profile games and, was able to be spotlighted on that national stage. If you like pass rush win rate, Byron Murphy is actually better than Jalen Carter was at Georgia his last season. Like that's the kind of ability you're talking about with someone like Murphy. To me, Danny, I don't think it's settling at all. I think when you look at this, like for me personally, if they took someone like Jared Verse at 9, and I like Verse, I think he's a talented player, but Verse to me looks like a guy who's going to be a good player in the league for a lot of years, not necessarily a dominant player.
I would rather have Murphy than Verse for sure.
So would I.
Verse seems like a guy who was just older than and stronger than everybody he played against in college.
And Verse,
Verse is the same age as Aiden Hutchinson, guys.
Right.
Aiden Hutchinson, they're the same age, like 3 months apart. They're
exactly
the same age. You got to be careful with those guys who really come on strong as older players. Velus Jones is a perfect example.
There's something about Verse, like, and it reminds me of when Andre Wadsworth was like a big time draft prospect and came out as a full-bodied adult from Florida State and just did not live up. That's perhaps not fair to Jared Verse, but here we are. Yeah, the scouting reports say on Byron Murphy, too small, arms are a little too short. There wasn't a ton of production as well necessarily in college, but that he is, like you say, Bill, great at beating blockers and the ability to just penetrate up the gut or wherever they have him. Here's my question. How does the mix look then with Dexter and with Zach Pickens and with Murphy? With all three of those young players, are there enough snaps on the defensive line?
Well, and it's going to be a tough work there for Washington and Eberflus to make sure that works. But for me, I look at it and, Matt, I want as much talent as possible on that defensive line. You worry about the snaps later. If you've got too much interior, like the Eagles last year, the Eagles had too much depth on the interior, right? Mm-hmm. But they found ways to get everyone on the field. It's never a bad thing to have too much talent. And that's where I sit there and go, well, everyone's, they need another edge. They need another edge. And that is that's true, but I still think you need the 3 tech as well. So take the best defensive player, regardless of position. And at that point, maybe you can move Dexter over to 1 tech a little bit more often, especially on pass rushing downs and not just rely on Billings. I know they played Pickens at 1 tech a lot last year. I don't think that's the right spot for him. I think he's more of a just play him on 3rd down and let him pin his ears back and go after the quarterback. But to me, I look at it and say, let Walker, if you draft someone like Murphy, let Walker play more exclusively on the outside. I know he's not going to get to the quarterback a ton, but he's going to set the edge. He's going to be able to run stuff and do what you need to do there and have Sweat and hopefully a disruptive interior as kind of what's the motor for your pass rush there. So I say take the best player available and figure out the snaps later.
All right, so we're talking to Bill Zimmerman, Windy City Gridiron. He has a story out. Byron Murphy is the best defensive player in the 2024 NFL draft. And like I said, Murphy would definitely be more exciting than Verse. I think it's close with Turner, but I want to kind of gauge how excited you are for Murphy. If Murphy is on the board and Odunze is on the board, and it's up to Bill Zimmerman, who gets picked, Murphy or Odunze?
In that situation, I still would probably take Odunze because I am a big supporter in just piling as much talent in front of your rookie quarterback as possible. And the same thing when you sit there and say, well, are they going to play, 3 wide receiver sets or are they going to play 12 personnel? Let Shane Waldron figure that out later. And I understand that JSN, wasn't thrilled with Waldron, and most likely that was because he wasn't on the field as much because of Waldron's 2 tight end sets. But you don't worry about that stuff. When you've got a guy like Odunze that could be an excellent receiver, and Keenan Allen, who's only here for 1 year, maybe longer with an extension, but even if a Keenan Allen is here longer, how long is it? 2 years, 3 years? He's not here 7 years, not at his age. So when you can get a player like Odunze and help out Caleb Williams, to me, that's still the move to make. I'm all about putting the offense in the best position to succeed. But at the same time, I would sit there and say, if we're doing Pole's position, if Odunze is on the board at 9 and he's the carrot that you can dangle to other teams for a trade down, I don't think it's a lock that he would take Odunze. I still think if he could get significant capital and move back in the teens and maybe take a defensive player there, he scores a 2nd-round pick and can get a receiver in this deep receiver class, that's going to be something he's going to consider. Because if you look at his top 30 visits, yeah, he's definitely looking at the guys that you can take at 9. But he's also looking at a lot of guys that are going to be available in the 20s and a lot of guys that are going to be available in the 40s. So I think that's something to look at.
Bill, you've hit upon an opinion that I've had consistently for months.
No, it has not been consistent.
I have believed this firmly to my core.
No, you haven't.
Except for that brief week or so where I drifted after Brock Heward told us such good things about Rome Odunze. But I'm with you on the trade down. This is where I am. I'm with you on the trade down for a deeper wide receiver pick and a deep class, because they're not going to be somebody who's used as your number 1. It can be somebody who's going to grow into that number 1. and then you get a defensive player a little further down in the first round. Who do you like among the deeper group of wide receivers? Because I find myself thinking about this way too much, a second-round wide receiver.
Yeah, look, the second-round receivers, there's a lot to like on these guys, but, they all have faults. So it's going to come down to Poles' evaluation here. And look, we can like Ryan Poles for a lot of reasons, but receiver evaluations, we got to question. Chase Claypool, as we know, was a debacle. Velus has not panned out. And certainly Tyler Scott did not set the world afire in year one. So, he scored with DJ Moore, but I think we all knew DJ Moore could play ball. So, who is he going to look at? I'm a big fan of Ricky Pearsall. I think Ricky Pearsall is going to have a very good career in this league. But again, that's a guy who's, 24 years old. He's an older prospect. Keon Coleman shows a lot of ability to just get up and get the ball, but he doesn't show the ability to get separation. So is that something they consider? Xavier Worthy, lightning fast. We all know the 4.21, but, I saw an interesting thing. I think it was in The Athletic, that the players that fit Worthy's profile of like sub 4.3, but his size, the only one that's had a successful career is Curtis Samuel. So is that kind of a profile you want to approach? So there's a lot of questions there. I'm a big Ladd McConkey guy. I don't think McConkey's going to fall into the second round. I think he's going to be a late first.
Wow.
You disagree?
Yeah, I don't know.
He's just saying wow.
I'm just saying wow.
All right, I think, Ladd McConkey on those wide receiver needy teams in the 29, 30, 31, I think that might be it. But, look, if McConkey's a guy that slides into the 40s, and, I threw out just an example on Twitter. You trade, like, Odunze's there at 9, trade back with Jacksonville to 17, and you can get a really good defensive player at 17. You bring back their second round pick, which is like 45, 46, and maybe a guy like McConkey slides for some reason, and you can do that. But there's going to be a lot of options there. It's a little early for Leggett. Wilson, might be in that range. There's plenty of receivers to pick from here. And, if I had to put on my Ryan Poles hat and guess, I would say Keon Coleman just feels like a Ryan Poles guy to me. But, I certainly can't say that that's a lock.
Bill Zimmerman, Windy City Gridiron, he does great work. You should be following him on Twitter. You should be reading his stuff. You should be listening to his podcast. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Danny. Thank you, Speaks. That was fun.
You got it. Thanks, Bill.
That's Bill Zimmerman, who wrote a compelling article about Byron Murphy that I agree it would be exciting given that it's a premium position and it might be the final piece for the defense. And I like that he said he would take Odunze over him. But I got my heart set on one of those three big receivers at 9.
I know you do. I know you do. I do like the idea. If you've got that many defensive players, you'd consider that many of the different edges that you might like, and Byron Murphy, I could see trading down a few spots if Rome Odunze's there to capitalize on.